The hammer slipped from my hand and clattered onto the worn floorboards. 3 strangers in matching navy polo shirts stood in my doorway, uninvited and unapologetic. The woman in front wore a blazer that looked too expensive for a mountain visit, and she wielded her clipboard like it was a court summons. "You have 24 hours to vacate this property," she announced, her voice slicing through the crisp mountain air. I stood there speechless, trying to process what was happening. 9 days. I'd owned this place for exactly 9 days. Bought it fair and square at a county tax auction for $5, all the paperwork sitting in my truck's glove compartment. But apparently, none of that mattered to these people. "I'm sorry, what?" I finally managed. "Claudia Pettin, president of Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association." She gestured to the embroidered logo on her shirt. "This property falls under our jurisdiction and you're in violation of multiple covenants. You need to leave. Now." My mind was still catching up. 7 months ago, I'd been sitting in a hospital room holding my wife's hand as she took her last breath. Nora had spent her career as an editor for architectural history books, someone who could talk for hours about Victorian gingerbread trim and Queen Anne details. In those final weeks, when morphine made her words slow and careful, she described a dream to me. A house on a mountain where morning light filtered through old timber beams and made everything glow like amber. I'd promised her I'd find it. I'd promised I'd restore something beautiful. This house, this 150-year-old skeleton of Douglas fir and hand-cut granite, was that promise kept. And now this woman was telling me I had to abandon it. "I own this property," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have the deed." Claudia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Tax auction sales don't override HOA jurisdiction. This land has been under our management since 1998. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. "I'm documenting these violations: unpermitted construction, failure to submit architectural plans, unauthorized occupancy. Each one carries substantial fines." Behind her, the 2 polo shirt assistants started taking photos of my truck, the lumber I'd stacked on the porch, the window I'd just replaced. "You can't just walk onto private property," I said. "HOA bylaws grant us access for compliance inspections," Claudia replied smoothly. "Section 4, paragraph 3. Now I suggest you start packing. We'll be back tomorrow with the sheriff if necessary." She turned and walked toward a gleaming SUV parked beside my dusty pickup. Her assistants followed, still photographing everything. I watched them drive away, my pulse hammering in my ears, sawdust still coating my hands. For the first time in 7 months, I'd felt alive again. I'd felt purpose, and now someone was trying to take it all away. I looked down at the 150-year-old floorboards beneath my feet, at the Douglas fir beams overhead that had survived more than a century of mountain weather. Then I walked to my truck and pulled out the tin box I'd found in the root cellar. Inside was a land patent from 1875, signed by the Commissioner of the General Land Office, stamped with the eagle seal of the United States government. I didn't know it yet, but that piece of paper was about to become the most important weapon in the biggest fight of my life. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the house with my laptop and a battery-powered work light, trying to make sense of what had happened. The county deed was clear. I'd purchased the property legally. Everything was stamped, notarized, and recorded. But Claudia Pettin had spoken with the kind of certainty that comes from years of unchallenged authority. By 2 a.m, I'd fallen down a rabbit hole of online reviews about Maplewood Heights HOA. What I found made my stomach turn. Page after page of complaints, arbitrary fines, threats of legal action over paint colors that were supposedly 2 shades off the approved palette. One homeowner had been forced to repaint their entire house 3 times. Another had been fined $500 for leaving trash cans visible for more than 4 hours after pickup. The name that kept appearing was always the same: Claudia Pettin, president for 12 years. No elections, no challengers, just her year after year tightening the screws. I closed the laptop and looked around the dark house. The work light cast long shadows across the exposed beams. I thought about Nora, about the promise I'd made to her. I wasn't going to let some HOA president take this away, not without understanding what I was up against. The next morning, I drove 2 hours to the county law library. It was attached to the courthouse, a small building filled with dusty reference books and outdated computers. For 3 hours, I pulled case law on property rights, homeowners associations, and something I'd never heard of before, land patents. What I learned changed everything. A land patent wasn't just a deed. It was a federal land grant, something called paramount title. It meant the federal government had granted ownership directly, and that title superseded everything that came after: state laws, county regulations, and yes, HOA covenants. I made copies of everything, 15 pages of case law and legal references. Then I did something I should have done months ago. I called Lenora Briggs. She'd been Nora's friend for 20 years, a real estate attorney who specialized in historical property disputes. 69 years old, semi-retired, and one of the sharpest legal minds I'd ever encountered. "Owen," she answered on the second ring. "I've been wondering when you'd call." I explained everything: the auction, the house, Claudia's ultimatum. When I mentioned the land patent, she went quiet for a long moment. "Come to my office," she finally said. "Bring every document you have. We're going to sort this out." Exactly 24 hours after Claudia's ultimatum, I heard multiple vehicles pulling up the access road. My heart kicked into high gear. Through the window, I saw a sheriff's cruiser, Claudia's SUV, and 2 pickup trucks with HOA logos painted on the doors. I walked outside, still holding my hammer, and waited. Sheriff Dale Merrick got out first, 50s, weathered face, the kind of cop who'd spent decades dealing with small-town disputes. Claudia stepped out next, wearing that same cold smile. Behind her came 4 people in matching polo shirts, all carrying cameras and clipboards. "Mr. Fairchild," Sheriff Merrick said, his tone careful, "I got a call about a trespassing situation." I pulled the deed from my back pocket. I'd started carrying it everywhere. "Sheriff, I own this land, purchased it legally at a county tax auction. Here's the documentation." Merrick took the papers and looked them over carefully. Claudia stepped forward. "That auction was invalid. This property falls under HOA jurisdiction, and he's refused to comply with our cease and desist order." I pulled out the land patent, now protected in a clear archival sleeve. "This is a federal land grant from 1875. Federal law says this supersedes any local covenants." Claudia's smile faltered. "That's just an old piece of paper." Merrick was still examining the documents. He glanced between Claudia and me, then sighed. "Ma'am, these look legitimate. Mr. Fairchild has proof of ownership through the county. If you have a dispute about jurisdiction, that's a civil matter." "Sheriff, this man is destroying community property." "Ma'am," Merrick held up a hand, "unless he's breaking a criminal law, there's nothing I can do here. This is a property dispute. File in civil court." He handed my documents back and walked to his cruiser without another word. I stood there watching Claudia's face as the sheriff drove away. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by something that looked like pure hatred. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You're going to regret this." Then she motioned to her clipboard crew, and they began photographing everything: the house, my truck, the lumber, every angle they could find. After 20 minutes, they climbed back into their vehicles. Claudia was the last to leave. She rolled down her window as she passed. "24 hours was generous," she said. "You should have taken it." Then she drove away, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust, realizing that this fight was just beginning. 3 days after the sheriff's visit, I received a thick envelope in the mail. The letterhead was embossed and expensive looking: Anderson and Price, attorneys at law. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter, 3 pages, single-spaced, listing 18 separate HOA covenant violations. Unauthorized construction, environmental damage, noise pollution, failure to submit architectural plans, failure to pay HOA dues. Each violation carried a specific fine. The total came to $45,000. The letter demanded immediate payment and cessation of all work. It threatened legal action, including property seizure, if I didn't comply within 30 days. I scanned it and sent it to Lenora. She called back within the hour. "This is exactly what I expected," she said. "They're trying to bury you in legal fees and paperwork, make fighting back more expensive than just walking away." Can they actually do this? No, every single violation they've listed assumes the HOA has jurisdiction over your property. They don't. This letter is legally worthless. She paused. "But Owen, you need to understand, this woman isn't going to stop. She's going to escalate." "So what do I do?" "Nothing, don't respond, don't engage. Definitely don't pay them a single cent. We're not playing their game." Her voice softened. "But you need to protect yourself. Get security cameras, document everything. When this goes to court, and it will, we'll need proof of harassment." That afternoon, I drove to an electronics store and bought 4 wireless security cameras with motion detection, night vision, and cloud storage backup. I spent the evening installing them, 1 covering the front approach, 1 on the back, 2 on the side property lines. If Claudia came back, I'd have proof. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. My phone was flooded with text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Angry messages, accusations, threats. I opened my social media and felt my stomach drop. Someone had created a page called Save Our Maplewood Community. The profile photo was a picture of my house, taken from the worst possible angle. The roof damage looked catastrophic. The debris piles looked like a junkyard. The caption read, "Out-of-state investor buys historic land for pennies, plans to demolish and develop, destroying our mountain heritage and property values." The post had been shared 300 times in less than 24 hours. I scrolled through the comments. They were brutal. "Who does this guy think he is? Someone needs to run him out of town. Our homes are losing value because of this eyesore." And at the center of it all, posting comments and fanning the flames, was Claudia. She never said anything directly actionable, just questions that planted seeds. "Has anyone verified his permits? I wonder if the county knows about the environmental damage. Concerned about what this means for our property values." This wasn't just a legal attack anymore. This was character assassination. That morning, when I drove up to the house, I noticed the change immediately. The neighbor who used to wave now turned away. A man who'd always smiled at me actually glared. A woman walking her dog crossed to the other side of the road when she saw my truck. I'd become the villain in a story I didn't even recognize. Inside the house, I tried to focus on work. I was measuring a window frame when my phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was an email from Maplewood Heights HOA. Emergency community meeting. Mandatory attendance required. Topic: critical issues requiring immediate action. Monday, 7 p.m. Lenora called that evening. I told her about the social media campaign, the hostile neighbors, the emergency meeting. "Good," she said. "Good. Owen, they're panicking. Claudia's throwing everything at you because she knows her legal position is weak. The social media campaign, the emergency meeting, these are the moves of someone who's desperate." She paused. "I want you to go to that meeting, and I want you to record everything." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Let her show her hand. Let her make threats in front of witnesses. Every mistake she makes builds our case." I hung up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. The same light that had drawn me here. The same light Nora had dreamed about. I thought about the 7 families Lenora had mentioned, people who'd been forced off their land by Claudia's schemes, people who'd given up rather than fight. I wasn't giving up. I pulled out my phone and set a reminder for Monday's meeting. Then I checked the security camera feeds one more time, making sure everything was recording properly. Whatever Claudia had planned, I'd be ready. The community center parking lot was packed when I arrived Monday evening. I'd come early, but it seemed like half the neighborhood had beaten me there. Through the windows, I could see people milling around, talking in tight clusters. I walked inside with my phone already recording in my jacket pocket. Every head turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. I felt the weight of dozens of hostile stares as I made my way to a seat in the back row. Claudia sat at the front table with 2 board members and a man in an expensive suit, her attorney, I assumed. She looked confident, almost pleased by the turnout. At exactly 7 o'clock she stood. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight we're addressing a critical threat to our community's standards and property values." She clicked a remote and a projection screen behind her lit up with a photo of my house, the same unflattering image from the social media post. Debris piles, sagging roof, the worst possible angle. This property, located within our HOA boundaries, was purchased by an outsider who has refused all communication and violated multiple regulations. She advanced to the next slide, a list of 18 supposed violations. These violations pose a direct threat to our community standards and your property values. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Therefore," Claudia continued, "the board proposes we exercise our authority to reclaim this property for community use. We'll compensate Mr. Fairchild $10,000, more than double what he paid, and convert the land into a protected green space." Applause broke out. My pulse hammered in my ears. "All in favor?" Claudia asked. Hands shot up across the room. I stayed silent, my phone still recording. Then a voice cut through the noise. "How can the HOA claim authority over land that was never part of the association?" An older woman stood near the middle of the room, holding a folder. I recognized her from the online reviews, Margaret Ashford, one of Claudia's earlier victims. "I was on the founding board in 1998, she continued. "That property on Mountain View Access Road was specifically listed as external to HOA jurisdiction. It's right here in the original charter." She held up a document. The room went quiet. Claudia's smile tightened. "The boundaries were updated in 2003. "No, they weren't." Margaret's voice was firm. "I have the county records. No boundary amendments were ever filed. What you're showing us is fabricated." The room erupted. People shouted questions, demanding answers. Claudia tried to speak over the noise but couldn't regain control. "Why are we voting to seize property that doesn't belong to the HOA?" someone called out. That's when I stood up. The room gradually quieted as people turned to look at me. "My name is Owen Fairchild," I said, walking toward the front. "I'm the person you've been talking about, and I'd like to clear up a few things." I reached the projection screen and pulled out my phone, connecting it wirelessly to display my own photos. "First, I didn't buy this property to develop it. I bought it to restore it." I showed a photo of the land pat. "This is a federal land grant from 1875. It creates what's called paramount title, which means it supersedes any local jurisdiction. The HOA has never had authority over my land. Not in 1998. Not now. Not ever." I clicked to the next image, the certified letter from the Bureau of Land Management. "This is confirmation from the federal government that the land patent is valid and legally binding." Then I played the security camera footage. Date stamped 2 a.m. infrared. 2 figures moving across my property with flashlights. The audio came through clearly. "The survey confirms it. Gemstone deposit runs right under this section. 3 million, maybe more. And he doesn't know. He bought it for $5, thinks it's just an old house. The room was dead silent. So we just need to get him out. Russell, can your company move in once the title's clear? The moment you say go. When the video ended, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I clicked to my final slide. A chart showing 7 properties in Maplewood Heights, all purchased through foreclosure or forced sale, all after HOA violations, all sold to Kingsley Development Corporation. This isn't about community standards, I said quietly. This is about $3 million in gemstones under my land, and about how many other families you forced out the same way. Claudia shot to her feet. This is slander, you're manipulating. The footage is time-stamped and certified, I said. The metadata is intact, and I have testimony from multiple previous victims. The room exploded. People stood shouting at Claudia. One board member walked out shaking his head. Another followed. Claudia's attorney grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door without a word. Claudia stood there, face pale, hands shaking. She looked around the room as if searching for allies and found none. "This meeting is adjourned," she whispered. Then she grabbed her things and fled. The crowd parted to let her through, nobody wanting to stand near her. I watched her go, feeling something unexpected, not triumph, just exhaustion. Margaret Ashford approached me. "Thank you," she said softly, "for having the courage to do what the rest of us couldn't." That night I drove back to the house and sat on the porch steps, watching the stars come out over the mountains. My phone buzzed with messages, neighbors apologizing, people offering to help, journalists asking for interviews. But all I could think about was the look on Claudia's face when the video played, the moment she realized her 12-year reign was over. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The next morning, I woke to the sound of vehicles pulling up the access road. For a moment, panic flooded through me, but then I recognized the cars. Margaret Ashford's sedan, a pickup truck with contractor's plates, a minivan with a Maplewood resident sticker. Neighbors coming to help. I walked outside to find 8 people standing in my driveway, some holding tools, others carrying thermoses of coffee. "We saw what happened at the meeting," an older man said, extending his hand. "Name's Tom Breslin. I live 3 miles down. Figured you could use some help with the restoration." Over the next week, something unexpected happened. The community that Claudia had turned against me slowly began to turn back. People stopped by with supplies. A retired carpenter spent 3 days helping me repair the porch. A woman who ran a salvage yard donated period-appropriate hardware for the doors. But I knew the legal battle was far from over. Lenora called me early Wednesday morning. "Owen, I need you to come to my office. We need to talk about what comes next." When I arrived, her desk was covered in documents, yellow legal pads filled with notes, and a thick binder that seemed to grow every time I saw it. "Sit down," she said. "We need to build an airtight case." She opened the binder. Inside were printed screenshots of every social media post from Claudia's harassment campaign, transcripts of the emergency meeting, the cease and desist letter, witness statements from 4 of the 7 property owners who'd been forced out before me. "Here's what we know," Lenora said. "Claudia Pettin has been running a systematic scheme for at least 7 years. She targets properties, manufactures violations, pressures owners into selling, then flips the land to Russell Kingsley at a markup. The security footage proves conspiracy. The previous victims establish a pattern. The land patent gives you constitutional protection." She looked up at me. "We're filing in federal district court. Civil rights violation under Title 42, Section 1983. Conspiracy to deprive property rights. Fraud. Harassment. And we're nomming Claudia personally, the HOA as an entity, every board member who participated, and Russell Kingsley." How strong is the case? I asked. Lenora smiled. Owen, with what we have, the land patent, the video evidence, the witness testimony, the fabricated charter, the meeting recording, this is the strongest case I've built in 20 years. They have no defense. Over the next 2 weeks, Lenora assembled our complaint. 40 pages of legal documentation, every claim supported by evidence, every citation exact. She laid out the timeline. My purchase, Claudia's threats, the sheriff's visit, the cease and desist letter, the social media harassment, the emergency meeting, the midnight trespassing captured on camera. Running through it all like a thread was the land patent, the constitutional authority that made everything Claudia had done not just wrong, but illegal at the federal level. But Claudia wasn't sitting still either. One morning, I received a certified letter. Another attorney, different firm. This one was offering me $50,000 to settle, to sell the property to Kingsley Development and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I scanned it and sent it to Lenora. She called back immediately. They're scared. They know what's coming and they're trying to buy their way out. Don't respond, don't even acknowledge it. That afternoon, I drove to the Bureau of Land Management office, 3 hours each way. Lenora had arranged for me to meet with a land records specialist, someone who could provide certified documentation of the land patent's validity. The specialist was a gray-haired man in his 60s who treated the patent like a sacred document. He examined it carefully, checked the Federal Registry, then printed a certified copy with official seals and his signature as custodian of records. This will hold up in any court in the country, he told me. Federal land patents create irreversible chains of title. Nobody can override this. Not a city, not a county, not a state, and certainly not a homeowners association. When Lenora and I walked out of that building, we had everything we needed. Owen, she said in the parking lot, what we have now isn't just a property dispute defense. We have constitutional protection. The 14th Amendment guarantees due process. Claudia tried to deprive you of property without any legal authority. That's not just fraud, it's a federal civil rights violation. She pulled out her legal pad and started writing notes right there. Once we file this complaint, there's no going back. This becomes public record. Claudia will know exactly what we have. Are you ready? I thought about Nora, about the promise I'd made, about the 7 families who'd been forced out, about the house that had survived 150 years and deserved to survive longer. I'm ready, I said. That night, I sat in the house and wrote an email to all the neighbors who'd helped with the restoration. I told them about the lawsuit we were filing, about what we discovered, about the evidence we had. I wanted them to hear it from me first. The responses started coming in within minutes. Support, encouragement, offers to testify if needed. One message stood out from Tom Breslin, the retired carpenter. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, but that's what makes it right. We're with you. I looked around at the restored interior, the Douglas fir beams gleaming in the lamplight, the stone fireplace standing firm, the new windows letting in the mountain air. This house had stood for 150 years. It would stand for 150 more. And so would I. Lenora filed the federal lawsuit on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, the local newspaper had picked up the story. By Friday, it was spreading across social media, but this time, the narrative was different. HOA president accused of million-dollar land fraud scheme. Federal lawsuit alleges systematic harassment, conspiracy. 7 families forced from homes in alleged HOA extortion ring. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, former HOA victims wanting to share their stories, attorneys from other towns asking about similar cases in their areas. But the most important call came Friday evening. It was from Sheriff Merrick. Mr. Fairchild, thought you should know. FBI just contacted our office. They're opening an investigation into Mrs. Petton and Kingsley development. Something about wire fraud and conspiracy crossing state lines. I felt my pulse quicken. The FBI. Your lawsuit triggered it. The evidence you submitted showed a pattern of criminal activity, not just civil violations. They'll probably want to talk to you and your attorney next week. When I told Lenora, she actually laughed. I was hoping this would happen. Once the feds get involved, everything changes. They have resources we don't. Forensic accountants, subpoena power, the ability to seize records without warning. The following Monday, 2 FBI agents showed up at Claudia's house at 6 a.m. with search warrants. They executed simultaneous warrants on her HOA office and Russell Kingsley's development company headquarters. What they found was worse than any of us had imagined. Claudia had kept meticulous records, emails detailing the schemes, spreadsheets tracking properties and payouts, contracts with Russell outlining profit sharing. She'd been running this operation for 7 years, 47 properties total, 47 families pressured off their land through fabricated violations and legal threats. The total value of the fraud was $8.3 million. Claudia's cut was $1.24 million. The local newspaper ran it as the front-page story. HOA president arrested in multi-million-dollar land fraud scheme. By noon, it had been picked up by state media. By evening, it was trending nationally. The same social media platforms that had been used to attack me were now flooded with people demanding justice. The Save Our Maplewood Community page was deleted within hours. Comments poured in from across the country, people sharing their own HOA horror stories, praising the investigation, calling for reform. Russell Kingsley was arrested the same day. His attorney released a statement claiming he'd been unaware of Claudia's methods. That lasted exactly 48 hours, until the FBI released emails showing Russell explicitly discussing how to manufacture code violations to expedite acquisitions. Claudia's personal attorney withdrew from her case. The HOA board held an emergency session and voted unanimously to remove her as president. 2 board members who'd been present at meetings where properties were discussed also resigned under pressure. But the story that hit me hardest came from Margaret Ashford. She stopped by the house one afternoon with a folder of old photographs. "I thought you should see these," she said. "This is what my family's property looked like before Claudia forced us out." The photos showed a beautiful 2-acre plot with a restored barn, gardens, and a small house that had been in her family for 3 generations. "I gave up," Margaret said quietly. "The fines kept coming, the threats kept escalating. My husband had just had a heart attack and I couldn't fight anymore. We sold for $30,000. 6 months later, it sold to Kingsley for $270,000. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You did what I couldn't. You stood your ground. And now maybe the rest of us will get some justice too." That evening, Lenora called with an update. "The federal prosecutor contacted me. They want to offer you immunity in exchange for testimony. They're building a racketeering case, RICO charges. Claudia and Russell could be looking at 10 to 20 years. What do I need to do?" "Just tell the truth. Tell them everything, show them the evidence, walk them through the timeline. The hard part's over, Owen. We won." But I didn't feel like celebrating. I kept thinking about Margaret's photos, about the 46 other families who'd lost their homes, about all the years Claudia had gotten away with it because nobody had the resources or courage to fight back. That night I sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. The house was nearly finished now. The restoration was almost complete, but the real work, the work of making sure this never happened again, was just beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Breslin. "Saw the news, whole neighborhood's talking. You're a hero around here." I texted back, "I'm not a hero, I'm just someone who refused to give up." His response came immediately. "Sometimes that's the same thing. The federal trial began 6 weeks later. The courthouse was packed, standing room only in the gallery. I sat in the front row with Lenora on one side and Margaret Ashford on the other. Behind us were 12 of the 47 victims, all there to watch justice finally unfold. Claudia sat at the defense table with a public defender who looked overwhelmed. She'd refused the plea deal the prosecutor had offered, 5 years in exchange for testimony against Russell Kingsley. She'd told reporters she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd been protecting her community. Russell Kingsley sat at a separate defense table with an expensive attorney who kept whispering urgently in his ear. The prosecution opened with a simple statement. This is a case about greed, manipulation, and the systematic violation of constitutional rights. For 7 years, the defendants conspired to defraud innocent homeowners of their property through intimidation, fabricated violations, and abuse of authority. We will prove, beyond any doubt, that this was a criminal enterprise designed to enrich the defendants at the expense of dozens of families. Then they presented the evidence. First came the land patent, my land patent, displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. The prosecutor walked the jury through what it meant, how federal law protected it, why the HOA had no jurisdiction. Then came the security camera footage. The courtroom went silent as Claudia's and Russell's voices filled the space, discussing the gemstone deposit, planning how to force me out, calculating their profits. 3 million, maybe more. He has no idea. We just need to get him out. Several jurors shook their heads. One woman looked disgusted. Next came the financial records. Bank transfers from Russell's company to an LLC Claudia had registered under her sister's name. $1.24 million over 7 years. Payments that coincided exactly with property transfers. The prosecution brought in victim after victim. Each one told the same story: sudden violations, escalating fines, threats of lawsuits, pressure that never stopped until they gave up and sold. One woman broke down describing how she'd lost her grandmother's homestead, land that had been in her family for 3 generations. "I couldn't afford to fight anymore," she sobbed. "I had 2 young children. The fines were over $30,000. I had to choose between my home and my kids' future." The defense tried to argue that Claudia had genuinely believed the properties were under HOA jurisdiction, that she'd been acting in good faith to protect the community. Then the prosecution presented emails. One from 3 years ago, Claudia to Russell. "The Harrison property isn't technically in our jurisdiction, but if we push hard enough, they won't know the difference." Another from 2 years ago. "Legal threats work better than actual violations. Most people fold once they see attorney letterhead." And one from 8 months ago, right before she'd confronted me. "This Fairchild guy bought the mountain property. Russell says there's minerals underneath. Let's move fast before he figures it out." The emails destroyed any claim of good faith. They showed planning, deliberation, criminal intent. The trial lasted 8 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. "On the count of conspiracy to deprive civil rights, we find the defendant, Claudia Pettin, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. On the count of racketeering, guilty." The verdicts kept coming, guilty on all counts, for both Claudia and Russell. Claudia showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead as the marshals approached. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed us, but I had only one thing to say. This wasn't about revenge. This was about proving that truth matters, that the law protects people who stand up for themselves, and that nobody, no matter how powerful they think they are, is above accountability. That night, the house on the mountain felt quieter than usual. I sat by the stone fireplace and opened Jasper Dalton's journal to the last entry he'd written in April 1891. "This house has stood for 16 years. I built it with my hands and it has sheltered me through every season. When I am gone, I hope it stands for someone else, that they see what I saw, that a home is not just wood and stone, but a promise to the future that something good can last. I pulled out a pen and added my own entry below his, dated today's date. This house has stood for 150 years. It has survived time, weather, and those who wanted to tear it down for profit. Today it stands as proof that truth is stronger than power, that justice is worth fighting for, and that some promises are worth keeping no matter the cost. I closed the journal carefully, placed it back in its protective case, and looked around at the restored interior. The Douglas fir beams glowed in the firelight. The stone chimney stood firm. The windows I'd replaced reflected the flickering flames. Tomorrow, Claudia and Russell would learn their sentences. Tomorrow, 47 families would finally have closure. But tonight, I simply sat in the home I'd promised Nora I would find, feeling the weight of the past year finally begin to lift. Sentencing day came on a cold November morning. The courtroom was even more packed than during the trial, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The judge was a woman in her mid-60s who'd spent 20 years on the federal bench. She had a reputation for being fair but firm. Claudia stood first. She wore a plain gray suit, her face pale, hands clasped in front of her. The judge looked at her with something close to contempt. "Ms. Pettin, you held a position of trust in your community. People relied on you to act in their best interests. Instead, you exploited that trust for personal gain. You manufactured legal threats to terrorize families off their property. You conspired with a developer to enrich yourself at the expense of others." The judge paused. "The court finds that your actions were calculated, systematic, and caused substantial harm to multiple victims over an extended period. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison on the fraud charges, 3 years on the civil rights violations to run concurrently, 2 years on conspiracy charges, also concurrent." She looked down at her notes. "Additionally, you are ordered to pay $2.7 million in restitution to your victims, including $350,000 to Mr. Fairchild. All assets obtained through this scheme are subject to forfeiture." Claudia showed no emotion as the marshals led her away in handcuffs. Russell Kingsley was sentenced next. 7 years in federal prison, $5 million in fines. His development company was dissolved, all properties obtained through the scheme subject to auction with proceeds going to victims. The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge didn't stop it. When we left the courthouse, Margaret Ashford hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of us." One by one, the other victims came up, people I'd never met before the trial, families who'd been forced from their homes years ago. They shook my hand, some crying, others just nodding silently. They didn't need to say anything. I understood. A month later, the HOA held elections. Margaret was voted in as the new president. Her first act was to pass new bylaws requiring financial transparency, term limits, and independent audits. Her second act was a formal public apology to me and all the other victims. And one by one, neighbors who'd glared at me started coming by the house. Some apologized for believing Claudia's lies. Others offered to help with the final restoration work. A group showed up one Saturday with tools and supplies and spent the entire day helping me finish the porch railings. The restoration itself was finally complete. Every window replaced with period-appropriate glass. The roof solid with cedar shakes matching the original design. The Douglas fir beams cleaned and treated, glowing amber in the morning light. The stone fireplace repointed, every granite block sitting exactly as it had when Jasper Dalton laid them in 1875. I added a small brass plaque near the front door, "Dalton Fairchild House, Est 1875, placed on the National Register of Historic Places." The designation meant the house would be protected forever, preserved as a piece of American history that had survived a century and a half. Today was the open house. 200 people were invited. The community, former victims, Lenora, the journalist who'd helped expose the fraud, Sheriff Merrick. Even the federal judge who'd sentenced Claudia sent a congratulatory letter. I stood on the newly rebuilt porch watching them arrive. Margaret was the first to reach me, carrying a bottle of wine with a ribbon around it. "For the celebration," she said, smiling, "and for everything you did." By noon, the house was full. People moved through the rooms admiring the craftsmanship, asking about the restoration process. I'd set up a small exhibit in what used to be the root cellar, photos of the house when I first bought it, the land patent in a climate-controlled display case, excerpts from Jasper Dalton's journal, a timeline showing the house's history from 1875 to today. And in a place of honor, a photo of Nora. She was standing in front of a different historic building, the last project she'd worked on before she got sick. She was smiling, holding architectural plans, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. I'd written a caption beneath it, "For Nora, who taught me that old things deserve to live again." People stopped at that photo. Some knew the story. Others asked, and I told them about the promise, about her dream of a mountain house where morning light made everything glow like amber, about how this place had given me a reason to keep going when I didn't think I had one. Lenora found me in the main room as afternoon light slanted through the western windows. "You did it," she said simply. "You kept your promise." I looked around at the house, at the people filling it with life. "We did it," I said. "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled and handed me an envelope. "This came yesterday. I wanted to give it to you in person." Inside was a check, the restitution payment, $350,000. "What will you do with it?" she asked. I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. "I'm going to set up a legal defense fund for people dealing with HOA overreach or property fraud. Free consultations, expert witnesses, whatever they need to fight back. Nobody should have to face what I faced alone." Lenora's eyes got bright. She nodded. "I'll help you set it up pro bono, and I know other attorneys who will too." That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, I walked through the rooms one last time. The smell of pine mixed with fresh wood oil and the faint trace of wine from the celebration. I stood in front of the fireplace and opened Jasper Dalton's journal to my entry from the trial, then added one more line. "The house stands, the promise is kept, and the fight was worth it." I closed the journal and placed it back in its case. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The same light that had drawn me here, the same light Nora had dreamed about. I sat on the porch steps and pulled out my phone, took one final photo of the house in the evening glow. Then I sent it to Lenora with a message, "Home." Her response came immediately, "Perfect." I sat there as the stars came out, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The house wasn't just restored, it was alive again. And so was I.